This is Louis Zumbach with Rush Hour Ag. Leave your message after the tone.
Hey Louis, it's Elliot Henderson. Can't wait to tell you about
rolling down the back road, truth riding with the dust, talking agriculture policy with people you can trust. From the field to the Capitol, we're breaking it down. Real talk, real issues from a real farm town. Every hour's rush hour when the work won't leave, so we're cutting through the noise and setting things straight.
What's your rush today, Elliot?
Well,
all right. Welcome back, listeners, to the Rush Hour Ag Podcast. Here with me, I got Louis Zumbach and Dan Zumbach, and this will be the second episode that we're going to get to tune into. And Dan, let me say, it was really good to get to know you a little bit more. I've known you for quite a few years, and I thought the first hour that we got to talk was great. And moving into the second hour, I know we'll probably discuss pipeline, some step up in basis conversation, and we'll even get into the weeds on mineral rights and some indemnity fund discussion.
You know, Elliot, what I'm really glad is you're not sitting here throwing softballs out just to make this show to be glossy. You're asking real questions, and that's valuable to the listeners and valuable to me, that you ask those hard questions. I'll try to give you the best answer I can because we're doing real things.
and we want you to know that we appreciate you giving us real answers. Maybe that's not the answer that's going to be in the end because we don't know how the end of legislation is going to be, but you're giving us real answers to the best of your ability on what's going on at the State House.
Right. Well, thank you, Louis. And it's the only way you can operate down there is lay it out there clean, because it's going to come back clean or not so much, but the truth's the truth and the answer is the answer. So that's what I'm going to try to lay out there.
Yeah. All right, let's rush into it. So, Dan, for the listeners, remind us again where you're at, what your role is in the legislature.
So, as you know, I'm a farmer from Delaware County, and then I go down to the legislature and serve in the Iowa Senate. I represent Senate District 34, which is 5 different counties between Waterloo and Dubuque. And I live in Delaware and spend January, February, March, and April, and hopefully not much into May, representing rural Iowa, and my focus is on agriculture.
And Senator, I think you hit a nail on the head there also, that you are first and foremost a farmer. You're in business for yourself, a real business, and you represent a whole array of people. But it truly is a what do you call it, a
Citizen legislature.
Citizen legislature, yeah. And I think that's important. I think it's important to remain that way. I know there was some bills talking about pay raises. I'm 100% sure that you're probably not paid enough. I think it's $25,000 base, and it's certainly more throughout the year than just the time when you're down here. But I hope that the legislator doesn't make it so high that people can do that for their living and they turn into it not being a citizen legislator anymore.
Louis, I agree with you 100%. Having those grounded roots and a responsibility at home helps you be a better legislature, because you're going to go down there and make decisions according to what's going on at home. And all the people at home have the same headaches that we do. And we want to make sure we keep that base together.
100% agree. Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about pipelines, since we're talking property rights.
Sure, you bet.
Well, where do you want to go with it, Elliot? You tell me what you're thinking, and I'll tell you what I've learned in the last few days. There's been some new developments. Seems
like we're still pretty divided across the state. So yeah, fill us in on some of the new developments.
So the whole carbon pipeline sequestration concept, which is something that we're got to deal with. Again, federal government throwing out these tax credits to have low carbon fuels. So our ethanol plants are saying, how do I get a low carbon fuel that our customers want? Well, you got to make the carbon disappear. And so the best way to make carbon disappear is throw it in a pipeline and ship it out, and they're going to bury it in the ground up in North Dakota somewhere. That was the general concept that we've been talking about for 3 years. And lots of hoop jumping happening and not happening. But today, just today, we came up with a concept, and we'll see how it passes through the system, of passing a property rights Bill of Rights. And it's been thrown out there for 3 years, hasn't passed, too many questions, not the right answers, and so it stalls out. I think we might have an animal out there that can both pass the House and the Senate that is true property rights and not anti or pro any project. And I think we had to step out of the box and say, if we want property rights, let's just talk about property rights, and let's not tie it to wind, and let's not tie it to solar, let's not tie it to pipelines, let's not tie it to power lines, let's tie it to all projects, and here's your property rights Bill of Rights. And that's what we developed today.
Is crop loss involved in that?
It's really broad, Louis, and the answer is yes.
Okay.
So
I know that's an issue back home, where the pipeline that goes through my farm, we were supposed to have crop loss for, mine personally was supposed to be forever.
right.
It varied depending on what you got for a negotiation. But they sent me a Dear John letter about, I don't know, 10, 15 years in that, yeah, we're not doing this anymore. And now there's a class action lawsuit against them. I didn't go to the meetings. I was busy that day and didn't go. I don't know what happened about it. But I know that a lot of these companies wouldn't have the problems coming and building the things they want to build if they just keep their word and do what they say they're going to do, instead of, yeah, we'll give you crop loss, and then, oh, it's here now, and
So like this crop loss you're talking about, it's just like a perpetual piece that follows this easement. And, I think of like that pipeline that runs there north and south west of Manchester. You can still see that pipeline today in the crops where the crop is uneven.
that would be the same pipeline.
They're supposed to pay for like that difference in yield compared to the rest of the field.
Well, the original contracts were somewhat individual, but many of them were into perpetuity. If you could prove crop loss, they were supposed to settle up with you. They did it for 20 years, and then you got your Dear John letter. And so that's been a half a dozen years ago. The Dear John letter came out, and they're not paying anymore. And those of you that had that type of an easement agreement, getting screwed.
Yeah, and for me, the original that would be in my contract was 3.3 acres. And I had crop loss nearly every year. Not every year. Beans take it better than corn. That corn will come up. It'll be the tallest, greenest corn early in the year because the ground's warm. And then by August, it's shrunk down. Of course, when this started, we didn't have all the GPS and the precision. I mean, now I can circle it out on a map on my
Right.
and know exactly what it is. But the fact is, it's not a large, off of 3.3 acres. It's not a large enough. It falls under small claims court basically. And I'll just be honest. I don't have the time when we're harvesting to go to small claims court to get $2,000 or $3,000 of crop loss and go through all that work. And I think they know it. I'm confident I could win, but they know I'm not.
But
after
you
a while,
spent
you just gotta
10,000 trying to gain 3.
Well, good, yeah. It's just not worth it. So I do think that I'm glad it does crop loss. I think that's all important. It needed to be done. I will say that I was one of those people. This was back in the 90s. I was pretty young. A neighbor of mine and myself, we kind of teamed up, and I think in the end I said, everybody can be inconvenienced for money, but I was starting farming, and I would say that and this is my personal experience. Yes, I have crop loss every year. I was paid real generously at the time, and it's at a farm that I don't live by, so my brother points that out to me because it goes through the farm that he does live by, or lives on. So we have a difference of opinion there because it's not very far from his building, so he's limited on some things he can do, or I'm not.
I want to bring some
Well, I
clarity.
am, but I don't live there, so I'm not going to do them things anyway.
Right. I want to bring some clarity about that particular pipeline. Now, this is coincidental, but Elliot, you live 25 miles north of me. Louis, you live 20 miles south of me. That pipeline runs through all three of us. I mean, it's next to all of us, and so we're very familiar with that particular pipeline. It's a big one. It's a 3-footer, and they're throwing every type of what I call pain product. It's propane, butane, whatever it is. It's gases, and they shove them all at the same time. And at the other end, there's some sort of specific gravity system. They're able to re-separate them down there. I don't understand it. I just know they do it. But the reason that pipeline has been so abusive to the producers is it creates a lot of friction. And that stuff going through is hot. So that ground under there, not only does it not freeze and thaw normally, but all the varmints in our soils, okay? And we all know there's bacteria and there's microbes and there's nematodes and there's all kinds of good and bad things for a crop. They all leave the place because they don't like that heat and they miss that freezing and thawing. Those are things that also help our crops grow. And so you plant over that, and Louis, you described it well. For a while it looks great, and then it runs out of gas. In the spring when it's thawing, that area will be thawed out quick. You can see the cows will go lay on it. If you have stock cows, it's warmer. And so that particular one has caused more crop damage than any other pipeline that I've ever seen. And so it's a good one to go by of what it can be because it's probably the worst. But there's a lot of pipelines out there that you and I drive over. 48,000 miles of pipeline in Iowa. 48,000. You and I drove over all kinds of them just showing up today. Most of them don't give any problems, but those few do.
Well, that's the one that sticks in my mind.
Yep.
And the other thing that I think should be considered at the state level is if you are within so many feet of this or whatever, yeah, you'd have to come up with whatever's fair, because I believe it does affect more than just the people that have it on their ground. You know, my neighbor can't build a house within so many feet of it. So when it gets to the road, it affects him too, even though it's not on his property. Somewhere, if there could be a level of money that's distributed to those people from coming from the income that the companies are profiting from. It doesn't happen because it's billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think Summit probably wants to share in that route. They'd rather give you X amount to just use it. But why not have a system where because they need the land. It's just like the railroads, I suppose, back in the 1800s. And if you ever want to do anything to cross a railroad underneath our local fair, we had to put water underneath the railroad. I think it took 2.5 years before we got that done. I mean, it was like I don't want to say fighting, because we weren't fighting, but they have so many rights to the federal government.
The process sucks is the best way I
Yeah.
can sum that up.
Big time.
Yep.
And I just think a lot of the stuff we talked about, property rights, right of first refusal, a lot of that, some of that would just go away if the people that own the land and were nearby it that are affected by these things were fairly compensated right off the bat, instead of having to sit there and negotiate. But no, you're negotiating, but so are you're negotiating, and everybody's negotiating. Well, you have to know when to cave. You don't want to cave too early because you want all you can get. But if you cave too late, then intimate domain can come in there. Mm-hmm. So it really does. And I know life isn't fair. I understand that. It's never going to be. If we all went to buy the exact same car tomorrow at whatever dealership, we went to the same dealership, we would all three walk away with a different price.
Highly
I'm
probable.
confident of that. I like that because I think I believe I'm going to get a pretty good price.
Yeah, you're wrong, but I probably got the best price.
Well, I believe in this situation, you're probably right.
But I want to back the train up a little bit again here, Louis. So let's talk about a wind turbine again.
Okay.
No one talked about the noise. When all these wind turbine farms are coming up, no one talked about the noise. The noise never crossed my mind. It was on my neighbors. It was his opportunity to do what he wanted to do. I can't say anything. It's not my land. I didn't love him, but hey, he had the right to do it. Until that November when they fired those things up. And I admit, I farmed in open station tractors for a year, those old White and Olivers you and I used to run. My left ear is all but gone. And when they fired them up in November, oh my Lord, no one talked about the noise. And my wife hears better than I do. And I've been married for 41 years, but those windmills almost made that come to a screeching halt. She was not a happy person because she can hear them so much louder than I can. Our bedroom happens to be on that corner of the house. We've got pillows stuffed in our windows to try to filter that out all night long. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And then above that, it's like a Chinese torture. You hear that squeal of that generator up on top that drives her crazy. And we should be compensated for that.
I believe you should be.
That is a true detriment to our property and our home from that noise. And we've had conversations with the wind turbine company about it. We're getting nowhere, and we've gotten nowhere. So we've been listening to that squeal. So if you think we're getting a little nutty, I'm going to blame those wind turbines.
How do you deal with this? And I think multi-generational down the road, the sins of the father of doing the deal and getting paid and compensated for it sounds great when you're the one that's getting paid, but what about 40, 50, 100 years from now? And the next people that are living on these farms are dealing with the underground pipelines, and the wind turbines are still here, and they've got the same problems that you have today, but really they didn't have any rights at the time to stand up against it.
Fair statement. We have things happening in technology and energy today that you and I probably can't even fathom. We know there's hydrogen going to be mined under this state. Mm-hmm. We know they're doing exploration wells already. In fact, one well in southwest Iowa has gone from exploration to having the production granted. Well, they didn't grant production unless they know they found something. So we did set up some policy this year. It's not done yet. It's still in the process to put some loops around hydrogen drilling. Could be a major energy source for this state, similar to what oil was in Texas 100 years ago.
So there's gonna be a lot of work done on mineral rights now moving forward in the state of Iowa.
And you hit it well, Elliot. And there's some unknowns there, and so I happen to be one of the ones running the bill on what are the right property rights. Because if let's say the three of us had a farm right next to each other, and they're going to put the well on Louis, okay, we're going to drill down there 10,000 feet. This hydrogen's deep, and they're going to start sucking it out, but it's on Louis' farm.
And we're going to suck horizontally because it's on my farm to both of your farms.
And it could be,
Sure,
because there's a
that's
pool down
fine.
there, they call it.
There will be blood.
But
That's right.
where's it
There
coming?
will be blood.
Where's
I'm thinking that
it
too.
coming from? Is the well on your place, but the hydrogen under my farm?
Right.
It's under all of ours.
And these are things that we are really trying to get our arms around early, so that you don't get taken advantage, and I don't get taken advantage, and you're going to get paid more because the well's on yours, because you got a road and you got trucks going on and da-da-da-da-da. And we will need to get royalties because they're vacuuming it out under our farms. And we're trying to get our arms around what's the right policy for that. And I'm sitting there as a farmer. I'm not a geologist. Now I'm consulting with geologists, and we're really trying to get this done right. Is it done right? I don't know. But I know doing nothing is wrong. And so we're trying really hard, and this will be legislation that I know will have to grow every year on making sure you don't get screwed, I don't get screwed, and Louis doesn't get ahead of the game on this, that we're all treated fairly with this process.
Does Iowa have some current mineral rights laws written, or
Very few,
okay?
because it's just
It'd be
we didn't have
100-year-old.
oil here. We didn't
Right.
we didn't have natural gas here, and so we didn't need to develop that. So we're looking at what's going on in Colorado, what's going on North and South Dakota, what's going on in Texas, what's going on in Oklahoma, and we're stealing their ideas because they've been there. They've been there for 100 years, and trying to adapt it to hydrogen. So we just got a couple wells going right now, and they're pretty confident it's down there, and I think that's going to be an energy source that's going to be valuable.
I think if I was still there and had the opportunity to do these things that you're doing, I'm 100% behind you on having mineral rights. I think possibly you may want to put in, though, some kind of provision that they end after a certain amount of time and get reestablished with the new owner of the land. Because
So clarify what you're getting at here, Louis.
so I have mineral rights on my farm,
Right.
and I sell the land, but I keep the mineral rights, and then they're distributed to my children.
Okay.
And then
And you can do that today.
yes, you can. And then they get older, they distribute it to their children, and then distribute it to their children.
Correct.
And then all of a sudden, hydrogen's found on this farm that's owned by Elliott now. Elliott never had the mineral rights, but in order to get the hydrogen out, they have to track down all these long lost relatives
Mhm.
because they've all been given little shares. And so it would seem to me that perhaps, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe you have a set amount of time that gets to be handed down, but that I don't know whether it's 75 years, 50 years, whatever, that then it reverts back to the actual landowner.
To the actual landowner.
Yeah.
That has some merit to that, because let's go 3-4 generations. You're talking 100 years.
Yep.
Have they really earned?
Well, not only that,
That
they don't even know
mineral
they have them, and if you can't track them down, you can't do it.
Correct.
So with
I
that
know
said,
that. I know that from being in Texas, and I know enough about this to be dangerous.
why don't we just leave it with the land then and be done with it? And forego the headache down the road.
Because it's my asset, and I own the land, and I ought to be able to.
But we could also legislate that it's going to stay with the land too.
You could. I mean,
anybody do
both,
that now?
here's a debate that's going on
Absolutely,
right today.
right.
Is you got merit in your concept, you have merit in yours, and so those are how we end up in those discussions in Des Moines.
I think this will hit a real bone with you, Elliot.
Sure.
That because this goes right up that avenue that we have a lot of discussions on. We discussed it all the way over here. You want to see land never change hands? Do that.
That's a theory. I mean, I'm thinking you'd put things into practice though that would prohibit, that would incentivize operators to own this land.
I think you're incentivizing another reason why a family wouldn't sell it, and it would continually be rented out.
So
because
let's
they're not
talk
going to
about-
give up their rental rights.
Let's talk about that. I'm gonna take where you just hit there, because this is a whole new concept. So we have Elliot, you're a little younger than me, and looking to try to get your claws into some land and
Sure.
expand where you're at. And you got Louie and I trying to figure out how to maybe move the next generation in, and he and I trying to find a way to slowly slide out. Although we'll probably never slide out because we love it too much. But we're not doing it because of tax law. I mean, long story short, I would find a way to sell it to my next generation today. I'm 64. And I would love to slide out over the next half a dozen years. I love it. You know, most people quit at 65. I'm not quitting at 65. I'm going to slide out till I'm in my 7s somewhere if I'm healthy. But I'm not doing it because Uncle Sam will take most of it because of the tax laws. You're not doing it because Uncle Sam will take most because of the tax law. So now we're burdening our next generation to take on a whole buttload of tax or debt when they're in their 50s or 60s. Well, they're almost nuts to do that. Why would they do it? I mean, they're going to take on a 30-year mortgage at age 60?
And that's
that
why
math doesn't work.
I know I told you about this Monday night. I showed you the email.
Yeah.
2 conversations. Elliot threw some mud on the wall that really caught my attention because I'm looking for ways that Deb and I can slow down and retire and yet have my kids and Jared take over. And one of those ideas was to give stepped up basis prior to death.
Yep.
And
If you want to protect the culture of agriculture, we need step up in basis while we're alive to transfer this stuff.
yeah, so
Absolutely, you're right. I mean, that alone would make land sales happen quickly. Just that.
so speed up a little bit. That's actually the driver that and what was the land trusts? Those were the 2 drivers that actually probably got this podcast kind of started, and Tanner and company taking an interest in it, and us being willing to dive into things that we like to dive into. But I actually sent this on to Representative Feenstra, who is actually he loved the idea, and he's going to be a guest. It's hard to line up a state senator. It's a lot harder to line up a U.S. congressman when they're back. But he's willing to come on the show and talk about it and see where it's going. I'm looking forward to it. But that's a simple, low-hanging fruit because I don't believe it costs the government anything. Because whether they wait till I pass away and then my wife gets stepped up basis, where there would be no tax, you do have to limit it so that the Bill Gates of the world couldn't liquefy all their properties. You'd have to limit it like it is now. But there's no tax disincentive if the results are you either wait till somebody passes on or you do it 20 years prior to that. The amount the government's going to get the same, zero. Or as zero as you can make it.
And all of us can relate to this. We're making that asset worth more. Our next generation is making the asset worth more than what we are doing ourselves because they're working and allowing us, you and I, to continue to farm longer.
Sure.
And so they've helped pay for that farm, and then you turn around, they got to pay for it again. And pretty soon you got a farm that's in debt forever that's been paid for 3 times.
Well, that's what I see. You know, I got a neighbor, and he's in his 70s. His folks were in their 90s. They were penalized if they would have sold it to him 40 years ago.
Yep.
So 8 siblings, they all fight over it. And 70-year-old farmer and company with children, they're done farming.
Done farming. Yeah. Because of that.
Because of this policy that we've had in place for so long.
I do know, though, that on a personal level, I do believe that, and we talked about this in earlier podcasts, that my father told us, you know, if you're giving it, you'll lose it. If I make you pay for it, you'll respect it and keep it. And I do think I don't think you should be able to give everything to your kids. They need to earn it or have sweat equity in learning it. And your operation's a lot like mine. You're probably growing a little now and then, and you're doing that because there's another generation coming up.
Correct.
You and I have enough to do. If they weren't coming up, we wouldn't.
We would have backed off a while ago.
Yeah. So I think there are things. Elliot's got. You want to talk about your land trust idea?
Sure. Yeah, we can talk land trust thing real quick though on step up in basis though. Like these sales, you know, there's a lot of family problems in Iowa, in America, when it comes to transition these and picking which child is going to take over the farm. And you know, these asset prices have gotten so high where if we could be selling these farms on contract, you know, you could make payments on that farm for many years, and then even after the patriarchs and matriarchs of the family pass on, you could continue those payments to siblings, and there's no dispute at this time of death. So it's like if we can front load these policies to where you could take advantage of a step up in basis many years before your passing, you can set your family dynasty up or your family, unity up many years in advance of your passing instead of
And
today.
you can do that while you're alive, so you make sure it happens like you want.
Yeah.
Versus, I know you can have a will, but that doesn't mean it'll be done to your wishes. And I'm a firm believer that my ground's my ground. It's not my kid's ground, but that doesn't mean that they're not involved in it and shouldn't be involved in it. But it's really Dubs in my decision what actually happens to it.
Right.
But I'd like to see that happen while I'm alive and help guide it, rather than I'm gone and hope it turns out like I hope it did.
Right. I agree. So let's back the train. I know I say in the skin, but if you and I back up to our grandfathers,
Yep.
okay, they could buy a farm and have it paid for in 10 years with no government programs. Just work hard, keep it together, don't make bad choices, and they could pay for it in 10 years. Our fathers could do it in 20. In 20 years, they could buy a farm, make it work. And it's always been tough. It's not like starting a non-agriculture business. It's tough, and it needs to be tough. I mean, the whole concept of farming is about grit and getting it done. So our generation, you hopefully can do it in 30. Elliot, they're making 40-some-year loans now.
Well, I
40-some years.
a lot of my peers, they're having to save their money with a career, paying down college debt. They're buying their first farms at 30, almost 40 years old. And the way, I like to make the comparison. You've had wages have kept up with inflation, but asset prices have skyrocketed.
Yep.
So, as I was growing up, I always remember seeing the guys that ran the maintainer. They've amassed 1,000 acres in their farming career. They could work a job at the county, buy 160, get it paid down, buy another 160, get it paid down, buy another 160, get it paid down, all on the wages of operating the maintainer at the county secondary roads.
Yep.
Or chipping and grinding at John Deere. Today, you can't do that. You can't replicate that today.
You can't.
So,
And people forget, an asset does not pay your bills. It allows you to borrow more money, but you got to get enough of the asset under your belt before they'll loan you the money. It's
But
the
you
three
can't
of us,
farm-
we don't have cash in our billfolds.
But you can't farm without the dirt either.
And you can't.
So how do you
farm
get the
without
dirt?
It's the toughest scenario I've ever seen is where we're at today. Farm sold the other day here in Iowa for over $20,000 an acre.
Northwest Iowa.
Northwest Iowa. Over 20.
And is that done a lot? I've always been told that's because of the livestock, the amount of livestock up there, and they need ground to stay within the matrix.
That's true, and it tends to be farmers buying it.
Right. Right.
But-
And it's good ground.
Yeah, and it is good ground.
Yeah. I seen that one in the paper also, and I think it was 170 per CSR point.
I don't know
CSR2.
that. Yeah.
Well, I did the calculation
Yeah.
quick because I just was curious.
I took a trip
You know-
out to Sioux Center a couple weeks ago. And
That's the heart of it.
I was
hit it.
really impressed at the prosperity in that community. Just a very prosperous community. A lot of new things. Everything was upkept. Hell, they still had a Pizza Hut in their town. Like I don't know that you'll find one in a 5,000 population town in eastern Iowa, but they're doing all right out there. Well, I got talking to some friends that I know from out there, and I didn't realize it, but a lot of that wealth has stayed. It's maybe a Dutch community out there.
Agreed.
They keep reinvesting. They keep the land in the family. Where like the eastern Iowa, they own a lot of their livestock is still owned by people out there. Where in my neck of the woods, JBS owns the hogs. The Mormon Church is buying up all the farm ground, and I'm watching my community wither on the vine. And it gives me some real concern that some of the things and policies we have in place are really hurting some of our communities. But families are successful keeping it together out in western Iowa.
And well, you hit on something, Elliot, that's very real. Let's look at churches. Should they own farm ground? You question it. And then you turn around. If you're the guy selling it, do you want to eliminate a buyer?
Well, not only that, I think that's a two-edged sword.
Yes.
If you're selling it, if you want to, and I've always been told this, I don't know that it's true, but I kind of agree with it. If you want to close your church, give them a farm, because then nobody gives.
Agreed. We've seen that happen.
Seen it happen, yes. But I think there's a difference between giving your farm to your local church that you've gone to your whole life, and calling the auctioneer auction the farm off, and a church buys it. I think there's a difference there.
Yeah,
So
you asked the question, so I'd like to answer it. As a seller of farmland, where's the hypocrisy in depriving the next generation or the next you farming that land from the opportunity that was given to you by the guy that sold it to you? by choosing to sell this land to the church for the highest bidder. Mormon church doesn't sell ground. They might trade it, but they don't sell. So that farm is now put into ownership by somebody that isn't ever going to have the same opportunity that person that farmed it all his life had and then sold it to them. So I see the hypocrisy in it, and I really struggle with that.
I can't disagree with you, Louis, because that church is based in Utah, and the income's going to Utah. Now they're going to say, "Yeah, we're giving an opportunity because we're renting it to a local farmer," but there's just crumbs left, folks. We know how that works. Just crumbs left.
If there's even crumbs, because a lot of these operations, they're burning old equity to be able to run their new equipment over more acres.
Yep.
They're really not making any money. They're maybe putting it in the hands of John Deere or somebody, but they're not putting it in the community.
People might not see this, but this is kind of the heart of our podcast and how come we partnered up. I don't totally agree with Elliot on this, and it's mostly an age deal. I'm on my way out. He's working on his way in, and so I'm not going to sell my ground outside of my family, or I certainly don't intend to. But I still like it to be worth a fair amount of money, where Elliot wants to buy it as cheap as he can. So that's kind of why we
You're putting words.
we call it the old. I am a little bit, but you want to buy it as cheap as you can. When I was buying it, I always wanted to buy it as cheap as I could. So that's kind of where the podcast part of it kind of came up. We spar. We sparred all the way up here. We get along great. But just like you and I, we spar once in a while. Sometimes I just like to be the devil's advocate. So even if I agree with you, I'll say I don't.
Well, and I always like it because when we're all said and done, I'm usually right, Louis.
Well, yeah, that. I've gotten used to it though. My shoulders are broad, so
let me pitch this land trust idea to Dan.
Go
I
ahead.
never got to talk to Dan about it, but so like in Colorado Cattlemen's Association has a Colorado Cattlemen's Land Trust out there, and we were out there for Commodity Classic, and we took the time and took a meeting with them. And they're using this land trust to curb urban sprawl, but it's to protect working farms and ranches in Colorado. Could you see a day where, like in Iowa, if we had some type of an organization like this to where we want to protect the culture of farming in Iowa? So what they've done is they put in perpetual easements on their land that ensures that land stays as ranch land or farmland. I'd love to see Iowa take it another step farther. If you're going to own this land and qualify for these programs, you've got to farm it.
So there is a program in Iowa, but it's set up a little differently than what you're saying. So there is I can't come up with the name of it, but it guarantees that the land will always be farmed, but it has to be farmed organically.
Okay.
So there is a group of folks that are doing that, and I can't think of the name right now. So I'm a little uncomfortable putting that type of a tight parameter on it. Not that there's anything wrong with organic, because that's a concept that there's a niche market for it, and more power to you if you want to go down that road. SILT, that's the name. That's the acronym for it. So it gets available, but it's very restrictive on how it can be farmed.
Are they implemented through a land trust?
I don't know the details to it. I just know just enough about it that it exists. But it is about never going out of ag production, but very narrow on how it can be farmed.
So like these programs are voluntary. It's not like you'd want to sign the home farm or the farm right outside of town. That'll probably get developed someday into this. But I could see a time in Iowa where we have a policy like this that as soon as you're done farming it, maybe you got 2 years to find the next owner to operate it. So that way you do provide that next operator the same opportunity that you had when you began farming it. And you can put some limitations on it, just like we already have right now with the, the 902 that we signed at the FSA office, that you got to make less than $950,000. Right. You got to be the one that provides the working capital. You have to perform the day-to-day duties and make the decisions daily on it. You can put some restrictions on it, but the way it works in Colorado is so you take like your full assessed value of that property, and then once you put these restrictions on it, what's the new assessed value? So let's just say $15,000 an acre ground now becomes $7,500 an acre ground because you've restricted all the potential opportunities for that land. So now with these restrictions on it, let's say you got a $7,500 an acre difference. You then take that $7,500 and then you sell it as a tax credit. The state provides a tax credit for that difference, and then you can sell that off for cash. The land trust then in Colorado, for example, takes 2% of the value. The farmer gets 90% of that value. And then whoever's buying that tax credit captures the 8% difference. So like on $1 million or $10 million is the example in Colorado, you've got $800,000 of tax credit you're able to capitalize on if you're the buyer of this tax credit. The farmer then has not the farmer, but the association then has 90% of that value to divvy up to the farmers.
So is Uncle Sam or Uncle Colorado the one that's
Uncle
managing
Iowa,
it?
yep, that's
So
right. It's actually the land trust that manages it and makes sure everybody's adhering to those standards.
But is the keeper the state?
The funding is from the state.
The funding's from the state.
Yep.
So,
and they have so many funds a year that they get to use, but that's how they're protecting those farms.
And the reason concepts like yours are coming up, Elliot, it's just tough to get your first bite at the apple. It just is. My first piece was a 60-acre, and part of it was timber, and I thought it was going to kill me. I mean, that 60-acre bite was tough. It didn't work. I had to subsidize with a lot of livestock, and my wife and I sweated it out. And finally, and then we're either smart enough or dumb enough, but the minute it got to where we could breathe just a little bit and got just a little breath of air above water, we bought another piece, which didn't work any better than the first one. And I think, Louis, you probably have the same story with yours. Those first ones are tough.
Yeah, they're tough, and I think every farm's tough. You know, we talk about that coming up here. You know, Elliot thinks, well, this generation had an easier time. I'm paraphrasing, but you know, I think every generation thinks they had it tough. Mm-hmm. I know, you know, your brother probably thinks he had it tougher than you did.
Probably,
my brother and my brother did have it tougher than I did. By the time I come around, we had a skid loader. Mm-hmm. He had a pitchfork.
Right.
Both had to clean out the pen, but you know,
I do think back to like '83. You know, farmers in Iowa united, and we passed a law that made it illegal for foreigners to invest in land in Iowa. Mm-hmm. And so it's, you know, farmers have stood up and tried to improve the positions that they're dealt with. Right. Especially here in Iowa, I think we've been champions on that.
But the three of us have been around enough that if there's an easy right answer, we'd have done it. We'd have it done by now, and that's why it's not done. There's no simple, easy answer that we can just pull it out, put it on the board, and say, if you do this, it will work. I wish that was true.
That's the way most policy is.
Yeah,
you have a problem you want to fix. My sister called me on the way up here, and was talking about some issues that the state's trying to work with, and she doesn't like what they're doing here, but she knows it needs to be changed. Well, how would you change it? Well, I don't know how I'd change it, but what they're doing isn't right. Mm-hmm. I said, well, I agree what they're doing isn't perfect, but you have to start somewhere, and this is where they started.
Well, to say, you know, the old farmer saying is, well, this is the way we've always done it, right? So, you know, sometimes we got to look to Colorado or Georgia or some of these other places and bring new ideas back to Iowa.
You know, and I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things that I go to every year as a legislator, and it's a conference called SARL, S-A-R-L. It stands for State, Agriculture, and Rural Leaders. And it's a North America thing. So we get together with the Canadian legislatures across the entire United States, and we compare notes. What's working in your state? Now, historically, I'm going to tell you up front, we tend to export more good ideas out of Iowa into other states than what we import. But we do import ideas. You know, if they've got the wheel running perfectly over here and we don't even know how to start the wheel, we'll steal their wheel ideas and bring them into Iowa and vice versa. Probably the most valuable conference I go to really go there, take notes, and learn what's working and what pitfalls to avoid. So there are tools out there to help us develop good legislation. But the reason we meet every year as a legislator is that policy needs to constantly be tweaked. Things happen. 100 years ago, we didn't worry about speed limits. 20 years ago, we didn't worry about distracted driving. But things change. In fact, we just passed a distracted driving bill. The governor signed it. Now, there's a new law to put teeth in. Where's the problem there? It's you and me. We've all witnessed it, and we've all done it. And now we have to get ourselves in a position where distracted driving can't be part of our daily lives. It's dangerous when we're trucking. It's dangerous when we're hauling our kids around. So the legislature will always be making improvement. There will be never a year when we go down and say, our laws are perfect. Let's build a budget and go home.
It would be great if you could just do the budget and come home.
Yes, it would. But everybody needs a tweak, and that's what we work at.
Before we move on to another topic, and that meeting with the Colorado Land Trust was really good. I appreciate you inviting me to go along, Elliot. The one thing I would do differently in it is I would not have it to be perpetual. They had one farm that was now built up on all four sides by town, and eventually that doesn't work for ranching either or farming. But that was the one thing that I noticed difference. But two things I want to hit on. Back to windmills. If you go to western Iowa, and I actually noticed this in Texas when I was down there, and you can notice it going down I-35. These windmills, the first thing you see, they start to turn brown.
Mm-hmm.
And I can show you
the one
pictures.
outside town here when we were coming in.
Okay, well that's the oil coming out of the gearbox. The next thing is if they don't get it shut off, is the fire, and then that's out of commission. And I'm wondering. I don't know for a fact this is how it works, but it looks to me, because I went by one in Texas, just north of Abilene, and I went by another one when Deb and I were out in western Iowa, out on Highway 3. It's got to be one of the first wind farms in Iowa, where probably 30% of them are shut down. And if I was running this company and I had a tax break to put up a new one, because it cost $250,000 to bring the crane out. The cranes are huge. There's no incentive to fix the old ones, it looks like. There's just incentives to build new ones. And so I don't know if that's for the legislator to look at or not, because it's a little out of your league, I believe, because there's, it's private industry. But it looks to me like if I was running the company and I was going to get, okay, I can put up a new one for free, or I can spend $250,000 just to put the crane up to fix that one. What are you going to do?
Well, and it goes right back to in our area, we're in the infancy of wind turbines. I live in Delaware County, and they have one built up in the Edgewood area about 15 years ago.
Right.
Now they did it in the Prairie Township area just 3 years ago. So I'll talk about the Prairie Township ones because I live by them
Right.
over and over and over again. One of them already did just what you said. It's got the brown streak coming down the side of the tower, and they had to stop her and fix it. I don't know the details.
And
but
they did fix it.
And they did fix it. Now I had another one got hit by lightning, and it sat down for 6 months now. They came out with a crane, took all the blades off, put all new blades on. It's 3 years old, and so they're like any piece of equipment. If it's moving, it's wearing out. And they all look good at 55 mile an hour driving down a highway, and you look over and they look just quiet and peaceful as could be. No, they are a machine that wears out and makes noise.
Yeah. Well, the one out in western Iowa, I believe, is 20-some years old, because I was told this, that it's nearing the end of its life, and whether, I don't know what'll happen to them after that. But just food for thought. And the other thing goes back to a quick little story, because I love to tell stories, and it's about mineral rights. So if you go to Buffalo Gap, Texas, there's a world-renowned restaurant called Perini's. It's a steakhouse. It was on Oprah television. He had a whole story. I met the man, and we got talking, and I asked him about how he got in the restaurant business in Buffalo Gap, because there's not much in Buffalo Gap. And he said, well, he always wanted to be in the cattle business. And he was in the cattle business, but he just couldn't make any money in the cattle business. And so he started asking a couple of his ranch friends, you're doing really great in the cattle business, and I'm really struggling. Why is that? And the other rancher looked at him and says, well, how many oil wells do you have? Well, he didn't have any. And his story was, well, I got out of the ranching business, but I wanted to stay in the cattle business, so I'm in the steakhouse business. And he's very good at it.
Yeah.
He served at the White House and different things. A very interesting person to
I always
get to
remember
know that day.
I got some family that's got ranch land in Arizona. We'd go out there for Christmas every year. I always remember asking Jerry, what's the difference between a cowboy and a cowman? And his answer was about $1 million. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Well, you know how you turn, how you make $1 million in about anything in farming? You start with 2.
Yeah, right.
So,
That'll do it.
So I think, we're going over these. Our intent is that in the future, we're going to have you back and see where these ended up. But we have a very big one yet that we haven't touched on. And it's one that Elliot and I really don't agree on. We agree that it needs to be there, but not how. And that's the Grain Indemnity Fund. What can you tell us about that and what's going on?
So give a little clarity on the Grain Indemnity Fund. It is a fund filled by grain farmers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's not tax dollars. Corn and soybean farmers take 1/10 of a cent per bushel, throw it in this fund to cover their tails if a grain elevator goes broke. That's how I can describe it in its simplest form. And we feel it needs to be updated. Not just us. Rural Iowa feels it needs to be updated. Commodity prices have changed, risk has changed, and what should be covered in that, and how should it look? And there's two versions. Okay, there's one version that kind of takes the system that we have today and expands it, but it covers a lot more ways that farmers market their grain.
Right.
Okay, that's one version, and it's supported by one very powerful ag organization, Farm Bureau. They like that version. So it's a small piece of pie that's covering a huge.
They do have, let's point out,
That's
though, a lot of farm members.
And they do have a lot of farm members. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not throwing Farm Bureau under the bus at all. They're a great organization. I'm a member of. You probably are too. And we're just proud to have them at the Capitol, ensuring that good policy is passed that represents Farm Bureau members.
Yeah, they're a great farm organization.
They are a great farm organization. They are the one that we can trust to tell us the truth. Now we have another version. The version I'm talking about is a version that's in the Senate, which is just where I work. I work in the Senate.
Okay.
There's another version in the House. That particular version is supported by all the ag enterprises other than Farm Bureau. So your Institute of Co-ops, your Agribusiness Association, corn growers, soybean association. How do I say this? Maybe not supportive, but they're all saying it's okay.
Okay.
Maybe that's a more fair way to say it.
So you can be when you're there and you're a lobbyist, you can be for, against, or
Neutral.
It's not called neutral though. What is it? You can register for, against, or
you're
undecided. I think it's called
undecided or
undecided.
monitoring, right?
Monitoring. There you go.
Right.
Yep.
And so these organizations are kind of taking that position. So I'm sitting there saying, okay, which way do I lean on this? I have one in the Senate that my
So
colleagues.
what's different about the House and the Senate bills?
So I kind of talked about the Senate bill a little bit. So it's a quarter-cent per bushel put in, but it would cover an elevator kind of about any which way you would have your grain marketed within that elevator.
You're talking storage, credit sale contracts, price deferred contracts.
All the above.
Yep.
Right, all the above. So no matter how you marketed your grain in that elevator, just storing it, still retaining ownership, it would be covered if that elevator would go broke. Now the one in the House does that also, but at different levels. So the House version doesn't cover the credit sales at near as high of an amount. The Senate version will cover it all at 90%. So if you lost $100,000 worth of grain, you would get $90,000 back. In the House version, if you own the grain, you still have ownership of grain, you would get your 90% back. But if you chose to market the grain through a credit sale, you would get 70% back. And you're saying, why would you do that? There's a question. Why would you do that? The Grain Indemnity Fund will be a few $1 million. That's the size of the fund that will be held by the Department of Agriculture that the farmers put in themselves. If we include all credit sales, that few $1 million, depending where it lands, 12, 15, 16 $million, would be at risk for billions of dollars worth of risk. And so as I take my farmer hat off and put on my coat as a legislator, I got to make sure that this fund is something that's sustainable. So as a senator, I'm leaning towards the version that's in the House that I think covers the risk better than the version in the Senate. Now, if I'm a farmer, take my coat off, take my tie off, throw my seed corn hat on, throw on a shirt that would be appropriate for farming.
I would resist all, but
I would say, hey, this is a great deal for a farmer. I'm paying a little bit. I got my butt covered everywhere. So there's a difference how you look at it.
And I also want to add, because we argued about this all the way up there, and two things: can the money be poached from government?
You're asking me directly?
Yep.
The answer is yes.
Okay. So that leads me to want to lead toward the House version because you wouldn't have as much money in it. However, as someone that does credit sales and price laters and deferred payment, most of the time you're doing that because of laws that
Tax laws,
yeah
tax reasons.
yeah you're not doing it because you want to.
Right.
You're forced into it.
You're
by
trying to
Uncle
minimize
Sam.
your tax.
Sure. So I think, and wearing that hat, I like having the all of the above. And it's because I'm doing these things because the government's forced me into doing them. So why shouldn't I have some protection?
So here's one of the conversations that we have, and I'm not saying that this is right or wrong, but it's a conversation we're having. So Louis, you do a credit sale for tax reasons. Okay. You have made a marketing decision already. Now, depending on what that credit sale is, you may or may not own that grain anymore.
True.
Okay. So if you made a sale where you don't own that grain anymore, and now you're expecting your dollars to
But
be
the
covered.
grain indemnity fund was to protect the elevator that went broke.
No.
No,
It's to protect.
it's to
Well,
protect the
protect
producer.
me against the elevator that went
Right.
broke.
Right.
That elevator can still be broke, even though I took that product back to Cedar Rapids to be milled somewhere. They still owe me the money.
But should the fund cover you that's already made a marketing decision that doesn't even own the grain anymore?
I think you look
that's
at,
a question that's hard to answer.
It's a possession question, right? Like the indemnity fund is there to settle possession disputes. If I take my grain somewhere and they're storing it, that's my grain. I possess it. They don't have it anymore.
Well, it depends what kind of sale it was.
It's not a sale. I'm storing it there. I'm covered. On
Okay,
the
now
indemnity
if you're storing it, if it's
Yes.
your grain, you're still covered at 90%.
Absolutely. But I do a sale on contract. Why would an indemnity fund cover that? The possession is there's no question who possesses it at that point. I've sold it. I have a contract. He owes me money, or she, but that entity owes me money
So
for the agreement we
So
have.
you're talking like a price later.
Price later, or credit sale. You know, I know
some-
I've given up possession. They have control of it. They can go take it and do whatever they want with it, and I've acknowledged that.
And now that's what it's still covered, but at 70% because you made a marketing decision to lose ownership of that grain.
But that's the new one. Currently, it does not cover that.
Currently, it does not, and I'll tell you why. Originally, it did. Way back to I'll say the 80s, whenever this started, and it covered everything. But what they learned in a hurry, when elevators went broke during volatile marketing timeframes, the credit sales dumped the fund immediately and made it negative, and they had trouble picking it up. And so after cycling through that twice, they said, you know what? If we want to keep this the grain indemnity fund viable, we got to remove credit sales. So they did. And so for the last 20 some years, it has not included credit sales. And the fund has been pretty good. There's a couple bigger elevators went broke. And we actually, you have probably never contributed into the grain indemnity fund until this year.
That's correct.
You're young enough. I contributed just a little bit when I first started farming.
We've never received anything from it either, though.
You made good choices of who you're doing business with,
That's what I think.
which is a big part of this.
Where that's what's incentivized us to make good decisions and do business with people that are in good standing. But I think these credit sales, we made the analogy driving up here. If we're all insuring at the same insurance company and Louis sells me his nice pickup out there and I go burn the thing to the ground, why is your premium paying for the pickup he sold to be covered?
So I'm going to spin off of that a little bit. So I've got my legislator coat on again. I represent all those organizations, every one of them. So I represent 60-some thousand people. And so what Agribusiness Association thinks is part of my decision-making factor. What the corn growers think is part of it. What the Soybean Association is part of it. Cattlemen have weighed in on it. And Farm Bureau weighs in on it. And I represent all of those. And with the House version, Farm Bureau is going to get probably 80% of the things that they want. Everybody else is going to get probably 80 or 90% of the things that they want. So I'm sitting here, I got to make a decision on which version I think I'm going to support. And I'm sitting here, every ag organization that I represent can live with that piece. And just one ag organization wants this one, and the rest of them are really, really frustrated with that one.
Well, go back to these credit sale contracts. These are contracts. We already have an instrument that settles disputes for contracts. Why are we trying to make the indemnity fund do that? We have a court system that settles these. Civil court system will settle a contract dispute.
It will, but I'm going to go back a little bit again. When you talked about poaching,
That's what concerns me.
okay, so I've been in the legislature for a dozen years, and I'm not going to name names, but there's some legislators that are a lot more apt to want to poach different funds than others, and the folks that are in control right now, I would say it'd be highly probable they would never poach that out because they know only farmers poach that in. But if someone else is in control, it's somewhere in the foreseeable future, and that will happen.
And
we know that legislative majorities swing. Some other legislators like spend a lot more money than what we currently are, and they see we'll make up a number, a $20 or $30 million fund sitting out there to make sure that fund's big enough to cover credit sales. They can pull it, and they will.
I do believe that, and that's why
they will.
That's the biggest reason that I would go with the House version. is because you're right, they will. And that happened the year I was elected on commercial property tax.
Mhm.
And I remember, I'm not going to name names either, and a lot of them that I would name aren't even there anymore, including myself. But they'd say, "Well, that isn't how we meant to write it. We were going to have it be for 15 years. It just didn't get wrote that way."
Mhm.
I believe them, but it doesn't matter. That's how it was wrote.
Correct. Correct.
And so I haven't, and you know, you're not supposed to be able to tie the hands of the next legislature.
Mhm.
So if you had $21 million sitting there, but you could get by with 10 or 5, do you really think that's going to stay around? And it's not taxpayer money. That's money that's put in by the farmer.
But it's still in control of the
But
legislature.
I know, but this is why I actually agree with both of you in the end that I would do the House version. Although in a perfect world, I would like to see the Senate version.
That's probably as well as you could say it, Louis, is what you just said. The farmer and me, I love the Senate version. That's all farmer. But I've been asked to be a legislator with a ag background, and so that's why I'm leaning towards the House version.
Well, I think, we all want our cake and eat it too. Of course, we want more.
Right.
Everybody wants more, but, to eat a healthy lifestyle, sometimes you got to say no to some things. But, what are you hearing, like this credit sale contract, like billions, right? Like how many billions?
We don't have a good number on it because when you look at the elevators across the entire state of Iowa, and we've all seen the giant grain piles that are outside of the big ones, and we still have mom and pop elevator over in Little Town over here. I'm not sure I can put a number on how many billions that is with a potential $20 million fund.
But like if you're talking billions and we need 70% coverage on several billion, how big's that fund look?
Huge.
Billions.
But we're going to stop. We're going to stop it. We're going to set a parameter on the fund size.
Okay.
So part of the bill is it's going to kick in at a minimum, and then it's going to kick out at a maximum. And we haven't just set those parameters of how many million will be sitting in that account.
Right.
So we wanted enough to get the thing started, but not so big that it's tempting. And the other thing is, to be fair to the farmers, you want to quit taking that off their check.
Sure.
You sell 1,000 bushel of corn, you're throwing $25 at it. Every semi-load, round number, you're throwing $25 into that fund today.
Is there anybody concerned though that like this is just a Bismarck? Like we're gonna build this thing knowing that when it goes out to ocean, it ain't gonna make it very long. Like if we ever have to use this thing, when you're talking billions of dollars, and we put a limit on it of millions, the coverage, really we don't even have the kind of coverage that would ever get close to the 70%.
Well, part of the grain indemnity fund that we're not talking about that we need to bring into play is the monitoring of elevators. And it's the most valuable part that there is to ensure that they're healthy so the indemnity fund doesn't come into play. And that is part of the system that they will be checked financially to see. And I don't know if you know this or not, but elevators that are at higher risk cannot even offer credit sales.
That's correct.
And so I think a lot of people don't know that. And I think that's a good place to be because they're the ones that are going to get in trouble first. And so let's not even put them in a position to get that deep into trouble.
So if we're policing that and we're keeping a really tight eye on that, maybe that would make funding that type of thing a lot safer enterprise for us farmers to put our money into then.
I think that's the most valuable part of it is the policing. And there's going to be some elevators where that policing is going to get a little more expensive because we're going to put some requirements that they are audited by an auditing system that's accurate and thorough.
So is now a time where we want to, as these prices are going to go up, do we want to see farmers experience a bigger burden for expenses right now?
Well, the cost of that auditing is going to reflect in the price of your grain because they're not just going to absorb that. You're going to get less per bushel to make sure that they're covering. Now, can you calculate it for us individually? Probably not very well when the elevator's handling millions of bushels and they have a $5,000 audit. It's going to be part of their cost of doing business, but it's going to be on top of it. But it has to happen. We need to know that these elevators are in very good financial standing.
I've luckily have never been involved with one of these. I don't even know, has there been any real, I know.
There's one in your district
Yeah.
most recently. There was a new one just happened here, I'll say in the last 2 weeks. It's a smaller elevator in southwest Iowa that was dealing with specialty crops.
Okay.
And so they don't even think it may even kick into the indemnity fund that they're going to be able to channel those dollars back in. So that's the most recent one. The one that happened,
Sound right?
I just know it's in Southwest Iowa, Elliot. I don't have a good handle on the exact
I
location.
think they were like they dealt, like you said, specialty grains, but more like seed oils or something like that,
Correct.
if I recall.
Correct.
Okay.
And so we're doing what we can
Sure.
to try to quit taking the money out of the farmer's pocket, to ensure that they have a healthy elevator to deal with, and make sure the fund is viable, sustainable, and there if needed. And as you can see by our discussion, all three of us have a little different angle on what's appropriate. But I'm the poor soul that's got to say, this is what's going to happen.
Bucks
So you
stop
can yell at
you,
me or
yeah.
praise me. You're going to do one of the two.
You have a challenging job, and I know you do the best you can with what you got to work with, and I have complete faith that you'll continue to do that.
Well, Louis, and thanks for bringing that up. As frustrating as it can be, I get to work with a lot of very good people, and I've had the opportunity to circle myself with people that give me good information. You're both constituents of mine. You both have called me and shared with me your concerns. You've shared with me your praises, which we don't always get. But when we try to do things right, you say, hey, that was a good move, Dan, and we appreciate those comments. But we can't make good decisions without good information. And so when our constituency calls us in a professional way, we're pretty good listeners. If you're going to call and just ream on us or throw us the nastiest email you've ever seen in your life, we tend not to read those as thoroughly as the appropriate emails.
And where it says your name, it helps if you actually put your name in.
Yeah.
Instead of fire it off so fast that you didn't put your name. It just says your name.
and I'm going to spin off that a little farther, Louis. If you take the time and energies to send me a email typed by you in your words, you're going to get an email typed by me in my words. But if you're going to send me one of those blanket emails where I just got 4,700 of them that say the exact same thing, I'm going to take that as one, and the rest are going to go in that magical file.
Yeah. I always got a kick out of the ones you'd get where they didn't even read it because they didn't fill out their
Type your
personal
name here.
information. Yeah. But
So if I send you a handwritten one, will I equally get a handwritten one back?
If the mail actually gets it there, that could happen.
so is there anything else that's going on that we might want to hit on, or that you think of anything? We've hit a lot of topics today.
We have. I'm probably as excited about this new property bill of rights piece of legislation that for agriculture. It is the first time we've actually hit a true property rights. So let's talk a little bit about this property rights bill of rights legislation.
Okay.
It is probably the most important piece of legislation that's going to happen for Iowa agriculture in the recent past. And it's
probably your other half.
No, it was a former legislator.
Your 15 minutes is up.
So let's talk a little bit about the property rights bill of rights. Probably the most important piece of legislation in Iowa agriculture in the recent past and maybe even the foreseeable future. There is an opportunity here where you and I, as property owners, will now know exactly how we should be treated and can be treated and will be treated when any type of these projects come through. There's been several attempts to run something through, but it's always been tied to a certain project. Well, that's not appropriate legislation where we're just going to box in a certain project. Let's make it right for all projects. And this one I'm excited about, and it just developed this week, and it's going to be difficult to vote against this by anybody, either side of the aisle, because these are rights for every property owner.
I think that's important. Doesn't matter if it's a pipeline, a windmill, a solar farm, whatever they're disturbing, they need to put back.
And look, it's something that's passable.
Sure.
Because let's talk about the pipeline a little bit. There's lovers and there's haters.
Sure.
And everybody has a right to that opinion. They do. And I understand why both of them are where they're at with it. But we can't pass a piece of legislation. It hasn't happened for 3 years because it's just tied to a project.
Right.
Okay, let's unbind it. Take the chains off. Take it away from that particular project. And virtually everything they wanted with that property bill of rights with a pipeline project, now it covers them all. And you've talked about, we've talked about, we've experienced all those projects. I don't know about you, but there's going to be new energy needs in this state, and electricity is going to be the supplier of that energy. And I don't know about you, I'd rather drive over a pipeline than drive around power poles. That's my opinion.
I have a little problem with the carbon pipelines because I believe they're more dangerous. And I've got some personal experience, although it's not going through anymore, but they they were targeting me the way it looked. I showed you that.
Yeah,
I already had my case laid out. I think we talked about that.
we did.
But anyhow, I appreciate what you're doing. I know as a former Lynn County supervisor, we worked hard on that with our planning and zoning for both ordinances, for the solar farm and wind. And we're blessed in Lynn County to have full staffs and people that want to do that and funds, because we're a large county. We have, we're just better off than a smaller county. We have a lot of smaller counties that came to us for our language. And we did deal with a lot of things you're talking about, not on pipelines though, but for wind. And I think it's great that you're working on the same thing. We wouldn't have had to spend them resources at a local level if we would have had this at the
Correct.
state level. So that's big.
Well, when you can get crop loss included, and you can get putting soil restoration properly,
Fixing tile is huge.
fixing tiles in there, and here's the one that's really key. So when a project comes through, they have a corridor, all right, and they're supposed to live within that corridor. And let's say there's just a few folks in that corridor that don't want the project, but everybody else does. They now, with this piece of legislation, not use eminent domain, they can go outside of that corridor. And if they can put together a group of people that are willing to put the project through and not use eminent domain, now the project can do that. So they can do the whole project without any eminent domain at all. They have the latitude to do that. Well, this should happen. If you're a willing participant, be a willing participant. And then these projects, let's face it, long story short, these projects tend to help Iowa. They create a tax
Some do.
base. They create energy availability, and so that's why these projects happen. And you said earlier, most people have a price. Just got to figure out what it is.
I firmly believe that.
Yep.
So yeah, no, that sounds like exciting legislation that you're working on, and I think maybe we'll kind of try to wrap it up. But I want to thank you for coming, Senator. It's been a great discussion on a lot of topics, a lot more than we had in mind, I think. And I really look forward to having you back later to talk about all these topics again, and which ones happened, which ones didn't happen, which ones have legs for next year, which ones are just dead. Although we know in politics nothing ever truly dies, it can be resurrected many times over.
Well, Elliot, I want to thank you and Louis both. You asked fair questions. I try to give fair answers. I will share with you, most of the folks in the legislature are good people.
Oh yeah.
They are good public servants trying to do the right thing. And quite often we get painted as a bunch of smucks that don't do anything and don't hear anything and just run a thing up people's behinds without caring. That's not accurate. We have very legitimate sit-down conversations and try to do the right thing. I live with 2 House members, and we sit around at night in the living room and we talk about and share with each other what is the right thing to do. And they are the most humble, real conversations you can imagine. And I enjoy being part of that.
Sure.
Do we hit the ball the right time every time? Nope. Baseball players don't hit home runs every time either. And we strike out now and then. But I will tell you, the effort is second to none.
I'm not sure who you live with, but I'm pretty sure you live with Norland.
Yes, I do.
So if you'd tell Norland hello for me, that'd be great.
Yep. Norland is a House member that lives in the DeWitt area. And he's a cattle farmer, and I'm a grain farmer. But he's in the House, I'm in the Senate, and we can compare notes and work things through consistent. We think very similar, but not exactly the same. But we get as much done over that couch than what we do sitting in the desk at the chamber.
Yeah.
Well, I think you said something there. Everybody down there, they're good people, and I think everybody down there's got Iowa's best interest in mind, and we're more alike than we are different in that regard. And I'd like to thank you for the job you do down there, Dan, and how you represent us back home. I think you do a fantastic job.
Well, I appreciate that, and we try hard. I'll throw one more statistic out there to let people know that the legislature are not the schmucks that they get painted to be. 82% of the time, 82, Democrats and Republicans vote together. That's better than most spouses get along.
No,
Just know that one.
That's the way it was when I was there. Most of the bills are bipartisan, and you only have the few. And many of them come down to, you were talking about somebody's property rights trumping somebody else's. And I know this hasn't got it to do with ag policy, or maybe it does. All policy relates to something. But you guys had a couple really contentious bills earlier on, and that come down to the same type of thing. Whose personal rights, I'm going to call them, or civil rights in this case, trump somebody else's.
Correct.
You know, and I'm going to come right out there and admit that I think you made the right call. I think I'm the father of 4 daughters. I think they have their right to have a team that's all women, all girls. Their right to go to the bathroom knowing that that's the bathroom for women. I'm 100% behind what the legislature did on them cases, but it did come down to rights. But you really didn't take any rights away from anybody that are true rights as far as living and.
When it's all said and done, Louis, and you're right on, all of us have the same civil rights. We're all there. They're all there yet, folks. And so go home and do the things you need to do and be the person you want to be, no matter what your personal beliefs are. All your rights are still there. But we're going to make sure women and girls are protected in the process now by the language change.
Yeah. So I think we're going to conclude, but I want to thank you again for coming. It's been a great time. I look forward to having you come back and see where these things went. And for our listeners, I hope you rush back for another episode of Rush Hour Ag. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.